Um, okay. Good morning, everyone. We're so happy to have this opportunity to share with parents today. My name is Sue Riley. I am an occupational therapist, and I would like to introduce, oh, maybe we'll just wait. There's just someone coming in.
There is someone coming in.
That's awesome.
Welcome.
Good morning and welcome. We're just starting our presentation. We're so glad to have you here. We were just introducing ourselves. My name is Sue Riley. I'm an occupational therapist. I'd like to introduce my colleague Rhonda, who is also an occupational therapist. We are from OTPT Services within the Toronto District School Board. And Lauren is our student from the University of Toronto who's studying occupational therapy. And Luan, welcome. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. We're so glad to have you here this morning. We are excited to talk a little bit about printing, fine motor, and literacy skills. And hopefully, I know as a theme today, how we can find some joy in learning these skills. But I just want to start off with, I know Elder Shirt did a wonderful land acknowledgement, but I just want to start with reading a land acknowledgement. The land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Just to overview of what we're doing today is we're going to be talking a little bit how printing fits into literacy, where does fine motor fit into printing, teaching, printing, and cursive, considerations and accommodations, and a Q&A time. I'm going to hand it over now to Rhonda, who's going to talk about where printing fits into literacy.
Thanks so much, Sue. So when we're talking about printing or literacy skills, from an occupational therapy and physiotherapy point of view, we're just really looking generally at two different types of skills, those readiness skills, and then kind of later on those mastered skills. And so literacy does have many components, one part of which is printing. And a readiness skill for understanding or doing printing is understanding that written language and words have a purpose to them. And so actually, just to take it from our the new Ministry of Education from last year, their literacy and printing program, it really is that idea that we have to understand that language has purpose, that communication has a reason to it. And so we need a means of communication, not just necessarily oral language. It can be use of signs, it can be use of visuals, it can be augmentative communication, but a means of communicating our needs and our wants. And which then leads into understanding and decoding that words have meaning, that there is something, the reason that we use words is to communicate, which then eventually leads into that strong comprehension and literacy skills. So this all also is very much foundational to our Ontario Ministry of Education. And so the 4 skills to prep for reading comprehension are learning the alphabet. So we need to know that what our letters are and knowing the sounds of those letters. We need to understand that printing is made up of words and letters, and that those squiggly lines on the page, when we read a story to really young children, like around 2 years old, if you were to ask them where the story was, many of them, not all of them, but many of them would point to the pictures on the page. But as we age and our brains and our bodies develop, we start to learn that actually the story is coming from those words and those lines on the page that are actually telling us what the story is. And so there is a development to those readiness skills and the readiness to learn about the alphabet and what words are. We need a means of communication. And then to participate in shared reading, to have that ability to come alongside and sit for a period of time and actually hear and participate in a story. These are the foundational readiness skills that are needed before we can really move on into those more comprehension of literacy. And the advanced skills then, once we have those readiness skills in place, what we're looking for is those skills of daily writing, independent reading, and the ability to work with words and comprehension. And so really, when we're talking about printing and writing, it kind of happens at all these different levels. And that initially, we're looking at what does the letter look like? How do I make it? What does it sound like? Those are more in that readiness skills stage. And then eventually it becomes those letters become a bit more automatic, and that printing becomes make words, write on lines, make stories, make sentences. And so we move from those emergent skills into those advanced skills. But in order to get to those advanced skills, we do really need to ensure that those emergent skills are there. And so again, just to look at our Ministry of Education, our Ontario curriculum, just again, this was taken from the curriculum for K to grade 3 for those early learners. And you can see that letter formations, using different modalities, understanding the basics of those letters to form words is the beginning of those literacy skills. Sue, you're on mute, yeah.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. We're going to move on to talking about fine motor skills and how they are actually related to printing. Often we get the as Rhonda and I work in the schools, and we're in so many schools within the Toronto District School Board. Our service supports the whole board. We get asked, this child has fine motor challenges, and really we know that means they're saying that they have some challenges with printing. But fine motor is a lot more than just printing. So what can we do to help our students at home and school? So if we go to this slide now, we can see that there are so many factors involved. There is our gross motor skills that also affect our fine motor skills. And that's our big muscles and how they are used. And that also is often referred to as our core strength, or those muscles that support our spine and our pelvis are so important then for us to be able to use the small muscles in our hands. So there's also visual spatial or visual motor skills is also required. We need our sensory system, meaning all that feedback we get from the world and helps us know how to use our muscles and in our body. We also need to know our thinking and our recall, being able to memorize the plan for making a letter, memorize the plan for making a word. So there's so many things involved. You know, I like to think of it. I have 2 children that grew up and went through the Toronto District School Board, and now I have a grandson. And you know, when my grandson was 3 months old, I didn't expect him to walk. I knew that there were steps or other skills needed, like he needed to learn to roll or to sit up, pull up to stand, and that these were different steps he needed to learn to get to the end result. So you see, printing can be like that. There's many underlying skills that we need before we're able to actually print. Let's talk a little bit about core strength in the next slide. So in core strength, we are previously mentioned, it's looking at those gross motor skills that are the foundation to movement. We need our body to stay upright allow for the ease of the movement of our limbs. For our kids, core work should be scattered throughout the day. And mostly, I know some of our colleagues were speaking about play, mostly in a playful, joyful way. You know, I used to like to say to parents, you know, go to the park, you're working on printing. Well, it wasn't really working on printing, but you were working on getting those muscles strong by going on the monkey bars, climbing up and going down the slide, working on those core strengthful muscles, like riding a trike, pulling a wagon, all those fun, joyful things that we can do with our children. And there's great functional ways at home too, by getting our kids to help at home, stacking cans on a shelf after grocery shopping, helping with wiping the table or mopping the floor. So lots of other ways that we can work on this core strength. And we're actually working on the skills we need to print. Crawling is great too, because it's working on both sides of the body while also working on the core. When we think about getting our kids ready to print and having the right core strength, we need to make sure that they are supported well when they are printing. So, for example, if they're at a table, the dining room table, and their legs are hanging way off the floor and the table's up too high, that's actually not the optimal way for the core to help with printing. So, having a smaller table, a smaller chair where your feet can fit, or even putting a stool if you're at the dining room table, putting a stool under their feet, just so that they're supportive and they can engage that core strength. So if we go to the next slide, we're again looking at some of those fine motor skills that we need before we can actually form a letter. Like I said, I wouldn't ask my 3-month-old grandson to walk. I would work on those other things through a playful, joyful way before they can actually get to the actual end goal that I want. So when we think about fine motor skills, we need to have good, strong shoulder strength. And that's again so that we have that strength and that stability so that our fine muscles can move. We need to use both hands together. It's called bilateral coordination or midline crossing, being able to use the two sides of the body together. Always when I'm teaching about printing, I like to ask teachers a trick question, and parents too. How many hands does it take to print? Well, we often think it's just the one hand, but no, we need the other hand to hold the paper while this hand can move. Again, we're looking for that stability and movement and using the two sides of the body together. Being able to cross midline or go over to the other side of the body is a skill that we need to use. If you look at your hand, an interesting fact is that children, infants, have a very flat hand. There's no arches because those muscles that you see in our hand haven't developed yet. But if you bring your finger to your thumb and you can see these beautiful arches, there's one that's called a longitudinal going up and down, and then the transverse going across the fingers. And these arches develop as we practice doing activities with our hands, grasping and releasing, and working on these muscles. These muscles are very important when holding on to a pencil. So we want to make sure that they are working on the strength and developing their arches. One of the things when we're going to talk about pencil grasp in a minute, but when you hold on to a pencil, there's many different grasps. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. We used to think there was just one, but there's many grasps that can be functional. But one important thing is for function is that we have stability on this side of our hand and movement on this side of our hand. And so that's called separating the two sides of their hand. And that's in a developmental stage and strength and stability that we need to progress to be able to move our fingers when we're printing. And then another thing, before we get to doing letters, we need to be able to make shapes and these pre-printing strokes. And you can see them there on the slide. So I mentioned a little bit about grasp on the writing utensil already. It is normal that children start using their whole hand and their arm and progress to using more of their fine motor, the small muscles in their hand. But we used to think that just having 3 fingers on was the best way to do it. But now, as we have looked at research and we've seen what children are doing, actually, you can have 4 fingers on that pencil. We just really want to have some kind of stability. Some children will even write with their pencil in between their first and second fingers. And that's a way for them to get movement. So really, as long as it's functional and there isn't pain for the child and they have the endurance to use those small muscles to write, that is a good grip. There's really some simple things that you can do to develop this grasp. If you use a short little crayon, and I tell teachers this, they don't like it. I tell them, take your brand new crayons and break them because they love their beautiful new crayons in September. But really, ideally, it's best if we have a short writing utensil because then we automatically use just one side of the hand rather than our whole hand then writing. And so that's an easy way to get kids starting in using a more mature grasp pattern. So I'm going to pass it over to Rhonda now, who's going to talk a little bit more about some strategies and helping your child learn to print.
Thanks so much, Sue. So we're going to talk a little bit about like the stages of how printing develops, because when we start printing, we start at what we call a cognitive stage, which is a stage where I really have to think about what I'm doing. I really have to think about, what does an A look like, and how do I make this A? And I might need someone to show me how to make it, and I might need a visual cue in my space to remember how to make it, and I might forget how to make it sometimes. And that's really to be expected at that cognitive stage, when I'm really thinking about how to make my letters and how to do my printing. Eventually, though, we do want it to move. It moves into this associative stage, which is kind of in between becoming an expert and not quite yet. And so it's that idea of, I'm trying it, I'm using it, I'm practicing how to do it, and it's becoming more and more automatic, and a habit for me. And so sometimes I might forget, sometimes I still may need a visual cue, but I still have to think a little bit about how to make those letters and what they look like. But it is becoming more quick and easy for me to do it. And then eventually, we really do want letter formations and printing to become something that is autonomous or automatic, a learned skill, a skill where I don't have to think about it at all. It just comes naturally. If I say make an E to all of you, I'm sure you could just take your pencil and make that E. And so we really do want to ensure that we are getting to that automatic stage, because eventually printing has to become more than just letter formations. It becomes, be creative with your storytelling. It becomes, use punctuation and use the lines and do the spacing in between the words. And so we really can't be thinking about, how do I make an E, when I have to do all of those other things with my printing. And so we do want it to become automatic. The thing is, though, is that when printing does become automatic, then we really want to ensure that I'm not sure you can see this, so I do apologize, that automatic nature comes with proper formation. So we always say top to bottom, left to right. And we say that as well with that proper pencil grasp. That tip that Sue gave is like $1 million tip of those less than 1-inch pencils and crayons and pieces of chalk. Because if I start to create a non-functional grasp in kindergarten or even before, if I start to form my letters any which way I want, I'm actually starting to develop that associative or those habits. And then when I do have to become really quick with my printing and my writing, and I have to be neat and I have to be creative, I'm not going to be thinking about, how am I making this letter? I'm going to go to those habits that I formed. And if I'm forming my letters from bottom to top, or if I'm using an inefficient grasp, it's definitely going to affect my speed, my neatness as I print, as well as how long I can print for, if that inefficient grasp really starts to produce pain. And so we do want to ensure that from the very beginning, and this is something that OTPT within the TDSB is trying to say as loudly and as many times as we can, we want to do really focus on teaching that printing in those early grades to ensure that we're building those good habits. And so when we teach printing, we want to use a couple of strategies. It doesn't matter really actually which printing program you use. We're going to take you through one quickly today. It's more so about, how do we do it? So we want to talk about an auditory plan. We want to have a story of how we write our letters, so that it works as an auditory clue for us. We want to use as many senses as we can. So if I'm making an I, maybe the letter story is down, dot. If I'm making an S, it might be make a C and curve the other way. It could be so many different things, as long as the letter story is the same. And I, as the person who is teaching whoever's in front of me, I'm saying the story and I'm asking them to say it back to me. We want to have a visual cue. We want to form letters with our children so that they can see. When we do form with them, we want to ensure that we're sitting beside them, and so that they can see how we are forming our letters in the same way. If we're across from them, it kind of creates a mirror image, and so then it confuses the formation in their brain. But so we do want to really ensure that we're sitting beside them, showing them how to make it, giving them good visual cues top to bottom. Using a motor plan, a kinesthetic approach, we want to ensure that they can, paper and pencil is not the only way we learn letter formation. We can do it in the sky. We can do it in sand. We can build it with blocks. We can pretend to make it on our caregivers' hands. We can do so many different ways of printing, but we do want to make sure that that motor plan again is top to bottom, left to right. And then we do try to group similar letters together because it's easier, and we group them from simplest to hardest. So we really do want to group some of those similar letters together to make it easier to remember formations and to learn the letters. And so I'm just gonna quickly take you through a printing program that is free and it is online, and it was created by 2 occupational therapists in British Columbia, and it is well researched. And so it's a great program, and it has a 2-page teaching guide for parents online. It has like lots of resources for parents, and it has those printing pages all ready for you with letter stories and everything in it. So we really do appreciate this program and the fact that it's available to everyone. And so it has, you'll see here, it's evidence-based, like I said, but it has a cognitive approach. And so what that means is that there's research that shows that for kids who are in kindergarten all the way up to about grade 2 age, it's better for them to use something called a multimodal approach, which is what the slide right just before that we went through, using all of those different senses to learn how to form those letters. From 7 and above, if we're still working on solidifying our letter formations, we can add another step, which is the cognitive piece. Before 7 years old, we don't really have the executive functioning, the brain functioning skills to do some of that self-reflection that is needed with the cognitive approach to learning. That extra piece is just that idea of self-evaluation, looking at your letters and just kind of determining which one was the best one and why was it the best one. So we can still do that with younger children. It's just that I may, as the adult in the space, have to model that for them. But if they're over grade 2, we may expect them to do that a little bit more on their own. And so this is just the 4 steps to it. Parent models how to do it. So that's that sitting down and giving them that visual cue. The child imitates it. The child says it out loud, that auditory cue. And then that cognitive piece for those older kids is the circling the one that's the best. So when we're modeling, we want to ensure that we're talking about the lines that are there. Printing Like a Pro has that middle line, or they call it an interline, which is actually really helpful when we're trying to determine the different sizes and shapes that letters should be. We have, even in lowercase, we have those tall letters that have to start at the top, and most of them are those center line little letters that go between the interlines. So we want to talk about what the different lines are for and how they help us. We want to model making the letter a few times, and we can tell them Printing Like a Pro also is great because it gives us which letter do we start, which line do we start with? You see number 1, number 2, number 3. And so we can talk about, just remember, look at the visual cues on the page to help you make that letter. That self-talk piece is that letter story that we were talking about. So we are really actually good at actually doing the verbal cues as adults, but the piece that we miss sometimes is having the kids say it back to us. That cue of saying it back is really important. And I will say, in my experience, I've had students who I've worked with for a very long time when I was early in my career, and I didn't do that verbal cue piece. And then when somebody else had done it, one of their teachers had done it with them and repeated it over and over again. It was the difference between them remembering their letters and not, and remembering how to make them. Initially, that auditory clue is very helpful for remembering, how do I make this letter? What does it look like? And eventually it fades itself out. And so you encourage them to say it out loud. You can help by saying how to form the letter if they're forgetting how to do it, and then reminding them to say it. So this is just an example. Down dot, that's their example of the letter story. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. And what we love about Printing Like a Pro is it does it for you. It creates all those letter stories for you. We just want to also ensure actually that we do use that consistent language. So if we make our own story up, or if the child makes their own story up, that's lovely. They're participating, they've made something that's meaningful to them. We just want to ensure that we're using that same cue every single time. And then that self-monitoring, self-evaluation piece, it's really about checking your work, going back and self-evaluating, making sure that we know that looking at what letter was the best and why was it the best. And so it's that idea of, if I look between these two C's, I'm going to circle that top C if that's the one that I made. And I like it because it has a nice curve to it. It's not, the space between the two sides is not too small. It's neat. It will sit on the line, those kinds of things. And then we can discuss why that was the best, because part of that self-evaluation and thinking it through piece, what we're doing is we're attaching the mind and the body together. And so that body piece is often much more automatic. But when I put thought to it and that thinking back to it, then I can really remember, what did my body feel like when I was making it? How was I holding my pencil? What are the skills, the cues that I used to make this well, so that we can incorporate that plan again and again into our printing. And then this is just, they have different kinds of sheets. This is kind of a last kind of practice sheet where we're really solidifying the letter formations. And you can see that they're starting to challenge the kids more and more by fading those interlines. And so they start really simple with the letter story and everything on the first sheets. And then as you move on and progress, they have that more and more of a challenge as well throughout the printing program. So the evidence that they have showed that 20 minutes a day, 3 to 5 times a week to practice printing was ideal. We understand that is really quite unrealistic for most families. So we just suggest, if you are focusing on printing, because it's habit forming, if you can focus on it for a period of about 6 weeks, and do it 5 to 10 minutes as many times a week as you can, then you're giving it the due diligence that it needs to try and become that proper habit and formation for printing. And then this is just their groupings, and you can see that it goes from easiest to most difficult in terms of those letter formations. We just wanted to talk about a couple of other strategies to support printing. Sometimes language matters. This is from my own personal experience with my daughter, who is 8 years old right now, but when she was learning to print, the diligent OT, was teaching her top to bottom, left to right formation, but I didn't really worry about lines because I was just trying to get that proper formation. And when she entered grade 1, her teacher was using lines and was saying, print on the line, which is what we would expect. But what that translated into for my daughter was, printing on the line meant start on the line and then go up. And so she was, instead of going from top to bottom, she was going from bottom to top. And so we just really had to talk about, you know what, we start our letters at the top and they sit on the line. And so just being cognizant of the language we are using. Darkening lines can really help students who are having a hard time staying in between lines. So darkening lines is very helpful with knowing where to start and finish your letters. The more cues we have on the page, those numbers on the Printing Like a Pro are really helpful because we want to reduce the reversals that kids are making. Again, things become habit very easily. And so we want to start with good habits from the beginning. And then using mazes, puzzles, dot to dots, all of those things that really strengthen our eye-hand coordination skills and our visual spatial skills. There's a lot that goes into printing, and a big part of it is vision. And so the more we can strengthen the skills of moving our eyes between surfaces, using proper spacing, putting things together like mazes and dot to dots, all of those things help us strengthen the skills needed for printing. And now I'm going to pass it off to Sue to talk about cursive.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. I really appreciate all those practical tips you were able to give. I know the theme of today is bringing joy to learning and wellness. And I don't know about you, but I had some kids that struggled with printing when they were young, and it was difficult. They were stressed out about it. They were avoiding it. But using these multi-sensory strategies can make it more fun and bring more joy to learning how to print. So I really appreciate that. When we think about cursive writing, which we know was in the curriculum and then out of the curriculum, but is now back in the curriculum in our grade 3 from the Ministry of Education. And so when we think about that, we're going to use some of the same strategies to learn cursive as Rhonda explained. But sometimes we think about, well, why learn it anyways? What's the benefits? Well, there really are benefits, and there's a couple of really great articles that have been written recently in Toronto because it's a newer thing brought back to the curriculum, one by the CBC in particular. But when you're learning cursive, you're not stopping and starting. So it can actually increase the speed of written output. In my experience in teaching my own children and other children about cursive writing, it can be a fresh start. They've struggled with printing in kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2, and we're like, let's try this cool way. Like they think you're going to make a fancy signature and that's cool. And so sometimes it's a fresh start for them. There's not as much stopping and starting, so the motor planning isn't as hard. It supports literacy, reading, and writing. And they've actually done research, if you can believe it or not, how they do these things and looking at brain scans of kids. And they're showing by using cursive writing, you're actually engaging more parts of your brain. So it can help with learning those literacy skills as well. So there's many important things, and if you're interested, please reach out to us in the chat, and we can share some of those articles with you. But when we go to look at learning cursive writing, one of the important things, if we can go to the next slide, is just as Rhonda had mentioned with printing, is that there's going to be a multi-sensory way to teach it. More ways of engaging our senses to bring it to our brain so we can remember it. So the use of an auditory plan, like a letter story that Rhonda said, you can make up your own, or there are programs out there, doing a model. I find that sometimes that's what we forget too, is to actually show them with ourselves doing it moving rather than yes, Neil, I see your question there. Absolutely. You will get access to the slides 100%. I believe they're going to be shared after. So looking at using your whole body when you're learning, making it big, making it small, and again, the self-monitoring and checking. So if you go, we go to the next slide, it's going to show you, this is from Loops and Other Groups, which is a program that you can find online. You have to purchase it, but there are some really good coaching about how to use it without purchasing the program. So example, they group all the similar letters together because it's easier for our brain to remember things that are similar, right? So we're going to start with an A, a D, a G, a Q, and a C. And you can kind of see how they're all formed similarly. And this is the story, okay? And it's great. You do have to know that the child understands how to tell time on a traditional clock. But to say for a clock climber, it says start at the line, go up to 1 o'clock, back around to 6 o'clock, up to 1 o'clock, and slide down to the line. And then you would practice an A with a D and a G and a Q and a C. And you can see how that really reinforces that motor plan. So it becomes automatic. The interesting thing about the woman who wrote this curriculum is she really, and as Rhonda was saying, we really need it to become automatic so we can do it with our eyes closed. So sometimes you can even practice with your eyes closed. Because if you can do it without your vision, that means your brain has memorized it and you can focus more on things like spelling and grammar and writing longer sentences. But until printing is automatic or cursive writing, it really is taking so much brain energy that we don't have it to use on other great stuff about being creative and using words and spelling and all those things that are very important for the development of literacy in our students. So let's go to the next slide. So what happens if your child still struggles with printing? And we all have strengths, right? We all have challenges. Maybe it's something that is they have learned, they've done their best. You want to keep on practicing it, especially if they're motivated. But there is a time where we have to look at accommodations and taking a strengths-based approach. So what are some accommodations that we can use? Well, number one, we can really understand that literacy is not just the printing, the motor part. And that's what we're really trying to say here. That's separate from the other great ideas that kids have. We don't want their ideas to be blocked because they can't get it down on paper. So how else can we get these amazing students to show what they know? So sometimes speaking their ideas and having someone scribe. If you're writing a test and you know the child knows it, they just can't get it down. It's much better if they can tell you the answers and write it down. It's a much more accurate reflection of what they know. Speech to text is so common these days, right? Hey Alexa, do this, do that. Kids are kind of used to speaking to things and them understanding you. Well, there's so many things, including on phones, on iPads, on our computers, on software that the Ministry of Education has licenses for, where we can speak and get our ideas out on paper. And then a student can edit it. There's activities that organize words into sentences instead of printing them, like the example there on the right. Using iPads to work on letter identification and formation. So just using all these other tools to help children who are continuing to struggle with written output. Um, I put these on QR codes here. The TDSB has some amazing resources online, some by the Special Education Department, some by our OTPT TDSB services. There is software that you can use at home as well at school. And some of them are listed there, like Read and Write, Midomo, Orbit Note, Screenshot Reader. So just looking at different ways and coaching children on how to use this software if written output continues to be a struggle. So we will make sure that we share these slides so you can look into that more on your own, because there are great resources there. Speak to your child's teacher. They are well aware. So many of our students now have one-to-one devices, meaning to help them with learning. We often get asked about learning to type as well. And in those resources, there is some programs that are free, that are online, that if your child, we always do recommend you learn to print first. There's something about the way that it engages with your brain, that we're learning skills, and it supports literacy to at least to try that, but we're looking in like more of the junior grades and you're still continuing to be a challenge. You may want to help learn your child to touch so it becomes automatic, so they're not looking at their fingers to type, the same as how we wouldn't want them looking at to do printing, but they're using their brain energy to get those great ideas out there. So have a look at those. And if we just go to the next slide, this is a QR code to lots of fine motor activities that you can use at home, and fun, playful ideas to work on those muscles, work on that core strength, all those things that actually help with printing, but that are fun and joyful, fun ways, making letters out of like Play-Doh, out of cookie dough, in shaving cream, fun, creative ways to help engage our children in joyful engagement with literacy. So we really appreciate your time and being here today. In the last slide there are some links to some of those articles and research that Rhonda has put together for us. So I believe that they will be sharing these slides and the recordings if you talk to the organizers of the event. But we'd like to open it up. If there's any questions that anyone has, please feel free to ask us or let us know a little bit about why you're interested in printing. Feel free to comment.
Please do, and thank you so much for joining us. If you don't have time to say, we really appreciate you taking the time on a weekend to come and join us at our presentation. And maybe we'll stop the recording, Sue, for the question period, just